Good morning. Welcome to News Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us. This week, we're joined by attorney Ken Altshuler, longtime co-host of the WGAN Morning News, and former House Minority Leader Joe Bruno. Gentlemen, good to see you both.
Good to be here.
If only there was something for us to talk about this
week. Nothing's happening.
On Friday, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, saying there is no constitutional right to abortion. This is a landmark ruling overturning 50 years of precedent. Ken, your reaction to this news?
Not surprised. Interesting that the actual decision was actually more stark than the one that was leaked, which was a surprise. I think people thought they may soften their language a little bit. Alito based his decision on the fact that abortion is not mentioned in the Constitution. That opens a huge door because there's many things that came under the penumbra of rights of privacy that are not mentioned in the Constitution. We didn't have computers in 1776, let alone gay marriage, let alone contraception. So it opens a huge door.
Yeah, I do think they just punted it back to the states. Every state's going to make their own decisions on this. The Northeast will continue to be pro-choice. The South, who knows?
Within minutes of the decision, Governor Janet Mills put out a statement saying, "My veto pen will stand in the way of any effort to undermine, roll back, or outright eliminate the right to safe and legal abortion in Maine." Joe, what's the fallout here for the race for governor between Janet Mills and Paul LePage?
Yeah. Governor LePage needs to be careful that he doesn't go too far right, because independents and most of the state is middle of the road. We do have extremes on both sides, but most of the state is down the middle of the road. He has to stay on that middle of the road position, and if he goes too far right, it will hurt him.
Janet Mills also issued a fundraising letter as soon as this decision came out. Is this a political boost for her?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think the Democrats were dead in the water about a month and a half ago. Now, this is giving a rallying cry to Democrats. You may get more of a turnout, just like some of the gun violence has been a rallying cry as well. So I think the Dems are going to lose the House in November. They may hang on to the Senate, but it would have been much worse without giving the Democrats something to fight about.
I don't see this as changing what's going to happen in November. There's a red wave coming. This is just a blip, a little.
But how big of a red wave?
And I still see 50 or 60 seats changing in the House. Yeah. I mean, I do, and I think the Senate, is probably going to be 3 or 4 seats changing.
The Supreme Court was busy this past week. They also ruled that Maine cannot exclude religious schools from voucher programs. That 6-3 ruling says Maine violated the free exercise clause by refusing to provide public funding to private religious schools. It's worth noting that the state law bars schools that receive public tuition money from discriminating against students and staff based on gender or sexual orientation, so some religious schools would not qualify for the funding. Ken, was this a good call by the court?
This is interesting. Justice Roberts said, well, if you don't let the vouchers apply to religious schools, you are not separating church and state. Most logical people would say, wait a minute, if we're using state money to fund religious schools, how's there a separation between church and state? I think they got it exactly wrong. I think it was a bad decision, but it's, once again, a conservative position. Conservative decision. And it's going to bring in a whole bunch of arguments for independent charter schools and a lot of people flooding out of public schools.
Living in a town where we've had school choice, and this has been an issue.
That's town of Raymond.
Right? Town of Raymond I live in. Choice to go wherever you want, but we never paid for Cheverus or Macaulay when Macaulay was around, because we said, well, here's the state law and the interpretation. This opens it up. We have people that move to Raymond just to send their kids to a private school, because we will pay up to whatever we pay to the RSU. So here we go. Is it going to cause Raymond taxpayers more money? Interesting question.
And we're also likely to hear calls for broader school choice. Perhaps it's been suggested that every student in Maine ought to have the right. Former Governor LePage has said things to that effect.
There's a lot of talk, and the money follows the student. So wherever the student wants to go, he gets the tuition money and goes.
Does that become an issue in the governor's race?
It does to a certain extent, but Janet Mills is a strong proponent of public school, public education, which I don't think Paul is not. But the point is, it does open the door to erode the financial foundation of public schools. Now, some people think it should be based on property taxes anyway, but it brings in it opens a Pandora's box, which didn't have to be open.
The Senate passed the first significant gun safety bill in 30 years, despite some fierce opposition from the right wing of their caucus. 15 Republicans voted for that package. To those who are disappointed this bill doesn't do more. Senator Angus King said something is better than nothing. What do you think of the law they passed, and who benefits politically, Joe?
It's not as extreme as the Democrats wanted. Democrats wanted assault rifle bans, no handguns, all this. Everybody who owns firearms wants safety. If you're dealing with mental health issues, that's a problem. So
this bill addresses that.
And this bill addresses, that's pretty much the gist of this bill, is to address the mental health issues. The question becomes, will they get all the mental health records and medical records of everyone to do background checks?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I agree with Angus King. Something is better than nothing. It was outstanding that they passed anything. I was shocked. 15 Republicans signing up.
A lot of us thought that wasn't going to happen.
I absolutely didn't think it was going to happen. I think they could have done more. I think they could have done red flag laws. That's controversial. I know there's some
But they help enable that.
Right. And preventing people from buying guns until they're 21 is another thing that they are opened the door to. Right. So if they could have done more, I think it is a start. I agree, actually, that banning AR-15s, so assault rifles, it's not what gun they're using, it's who's using it. Yeah. You got to focus on the person. Now, the mental health aspect of it is somewhat of a deflection because guns still kill people. And the bottom line is that we do have to look at mental health, but we have to look at some logical restrictions.
Paul LePage this past week told the Portland Press-Herald he would try to cut state support for asylum seekers to take away their eligibility for assistance to pay for food, shelter, and other needs while they await federal authorization to work. They can't apply for that for at least 6 months. He also said he would try once again, as he did as governor, to deny state general assistance to asylum seekers, which state law allows now. LePage told the paper he doesn't believe asylum seekers are here legally because they didn't go through Ellis Island and they don't have the paperwork. Ken, what do you make of this as a stand to take as he's looking to get another term?
Well, I was shocked that Ellis Island was still open. I thought it
Which
closed.
In fact, it's not. Yeah.
The bottom line here is that I don't think it's a good tact on his part. We're talking about asylum seekers, and the law is very clear with asylum seekers that, they have certain protections even though they're not citizens. And I think most people support asylum seekers being able to have some support. It's one thing to be an illegal alien, not having a green card or something like that. Asylum seekers are here legally, legitimately. I don't think it's a good political view for him, political tact.
I think he was referring to the people that are rushing across the southern border, and being shipped all over the country, and then asking for help. They're not, we can call them asylum seekers, but they're really not.
Well, that's a legal status.
Right.
Correct. Say that. Right. Say, I don't think it should apply to people getting over the southern border and just using it as an excuse. He didn't say that.
I know, he didn't say it, but I think that, sometimes you have to read into what they're trying to say.
What about supporting the idea of letting them work as soon as possible? These people often want to do so. Sure. Then you don't have to be on general assistance.
All for it. I mean, I think every Republican would be happy if people came to this country and said, I'm going right to work.
And that's a federal change that would have to be
Absolutely.
made.
And it's one that should happen, and I think it's bipartisan. I think everybody would agree with that.
More serious business happening in Washington this week. There were 2 more public hearings from the House January 6th committee. In the first, Arizona and Georgia elections officials recounted how they were pressured by President Trump and others to change election results. Trump's continued false claims of a stolen election led to threats, harassment, and intimidation of elections officials and their families. And then in Thursday's hearing, the focus was on the president putting pressure on the Justice Department officials to overturn the election. And you had White House aides naming names of members of Congress who sought pardons from President Trump. Joe, what's your takeaway of what we're hearing?
It's such a partisan hearing. I think people have tuned it out, to be honest with you. The committee makeup is so partisan that no one believes a lot of what's going on. Was there pressure by a guy who lost an election, the president? Yes, no doubt about it. He couldn't accept that he lost. But when you start talking about harassment of public officials, well, what about the harassment of the Supreme Court justices?
Well, and then the Senate took steps to correct that. Should they do the same thing to protect elections workers? These people are trying to do their jobs, and going to your grandmother's house because you're mad at somebody. Come on.
Look, it's not something I condone, but I don't think politically it's going to have much effect.
But you say it's partisan. Ken, these are Republican witnesses testifying, former Trump supporters.
First of all, McCarthy had a choice. He nominated 5 people for the committee.
Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader. Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi vetoed 2 of them who voted against the certification of the election and joined the Texas lawsuit against it, okay? There were 3 remaining. he pulled them all off. So when you say
And supposedly Donald Trump is now unhappy about that because there is no representation of his side.
Right. So that's number one. Number two, you hit it right on the nail. These are Republican witnesses, Donald Trump supporters, Donald Trump advisors. You haven't seen one Democrat who's come forward and said anything as a witness. But you have William Barr, Bill Barr, the former AG, who was one of the best witnesses that the Democrats would ever see. Yep. I think it's a condemnation of Donald Trump. It amazes me. But one thing you said that's true, the people who need to watch it aren't. Because the people who are watching it you're preaching to the converted. And that's the problem with these hearings.
The president this past week proposed a federal gas tax holiday for 3 months. That means the federal gas tax of about 18 cents would not be collected for 3 months. And the question is, Joe, is that a good idea? Should states follow suit?
Horrible idea.
Why?
Yeah, because the roads are falling apart now. That's how you fund building your roads and maintaining your roads. You suspend that, you lose millions of dollars, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's temporary. It doesn't fix the problem. We need to drill oil. That's what we need to do.
Well, it took me 20 more minutes to get here because of all the road construction. So I think it's a great idea, and it's a great idea from the perspective of optics. Okay, you have to admit it looks good. It's like Janet Mills sending $850 checks out. It looks good. Whether it's financially good, I mean, talk about inflation, talk about more loss of money and revenue. That's a problem. But I think people need to feel they're getting some relief, and I think that's a good feel legislation. I think that's a good idea.
Except when October comes, everyone says, "Hey, you just raised the gas taxes on me," and if it's a state and federal combined, that's 40 or 50 cents a gallon.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
And let's not forget, we keep bonding for roads because we don't have enough money coming in because as we get better gas mileage in our vehicles, we're losing revenue. A
report in the Bangor Daily News this past week finds a sharp decline in unenrolled voters in Maine. Just 32% are unenrolled now, compared with 37% 4 years ago. Ken, what does that tell you about the tradition of independent voters making the decisions in Maine?
I'm actually surprised by that, because with the feeling of American citizens that Congress, the approval rating of Congress is lower than Joe Biden by a third, right? You'd think they wouldn't want to belong to the Republican Party or Democratic Party. They'd want to be unenrolled. But I think they want to, I think it's saying that people feel strongly about things, so they start gravitating toward positions more. So I do think, and I'm not sure Maine was ever that independent, but it's certainly less now than it was in the days of Angus King being governor and some of the, I mean, we've had more independent governors than any state in the country.
Yeah, I do think it's because of the partisan politics now. People are taking sides. They're tired of being down the middle and saying, well, I can vote Republican and Democrat. Now they're tired of the extreme left, they're tired of the extreme right, and they're kind of gravitating towards those positions.
Finally, we'll wrap up with our winners and losers in politics this week. Joe, you go first.
Hate to say this, but Paul LePage and that Ellis Island comment was not a good one. And wow.
As far, a winner?
I don't have a winner, actually. It was a tough week in politics, and I don't see a winner in all this.
Okay. I have a winner. The January 6th Commission is certainly a winner, and Liz Cheney in particular. Here's a Republican that, in face of losing her congressional seat, which she will.
Oh, absolutely.
Took a stand and took a principled stand. And if people just listened to her, I think a lot of people who were fooled by Donald Trump would know what the truth is, and the big lie would be over. I think the loser is the American women. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I want to point out that nobody is pro-abortion, but this was an issue of pro-choice, and women have lost a constitutional right they had for 50 years. So American women are the losers this week.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for being with us. Thank you for being with us as well. News Center Maine is back after this.